Welcome to Hindu Heritage Hub, where history, identity, and culture come alive. By the mid-1970s, Indira Gandhi's paranoia had escalated significantly. She imposed a state of emergency in India, broke up her own party, and corrupted the government and bureaucracy in unprecedented ways. Tragically, I think it also played a role in the loss of her son, Sanjay. 1971 was a tough year for Indira Gandhi. The continuity of her government and her control over India was heavily reliant on support from the Soviet Union and its security and intelligence apparatus, the KGB. At the same time, she was informed and had valid reasons to suspect that the CIA had also established deep roots within India. Her close ties with the Soviets, the financial support they provided, the intelligence the KGB shared, and their control over Indian media and public perception further fueled her concerns about the CIA. The KGB kept Indira Gandhi informed about CIA activities throughout the Indian subcontinent. They also convinced her that the CIA was plotting to overthrow her. The Americans did very little to alleviate these fears. In 1971, President Nixon and Henry Kissinger infamously had referred to Indians as bastards and Indira Gandhi a bitch shortly after meeting her in Washington, D.C. Much earlier, during Nehru's premiership, when Indira was a party official, she was the channel for CIA to fund the Congress Party and support its activities. Now, many years later, as Prime Minister herself and fully aligned with the Soviets, she couldn't help but wonder where the CIA was channeling its money and resources. Naturally, she suspected it was going to her opposition. Indira Gandhi found herself caught between the KGB and the CIA. Her choice of ally, however, was quite clear. It had to be the Soviets, especially after the Bangladesh Liberation War, during which the Soviets provided a counterbalance to the joint American-Chinese threat to India. Was Indira Gandhi a friend of the Soviets, or was she being controlled by them? How did the Soviets manage to push her to a level of paranoia that she ended up breaking Pakistan into two? But more importantly, how did Indira turn away from the CIA and walk into the hands of KGB? After World War II, one of Soviet Union's biggest priorities was to contain China. The Soviets could not take a chance and let China overshadow it as a leading force in global communism especially. The Soviet Union was determined not to lose the post-colonial, newly independent countries like India to the Chinese influence or dominance. China's attack on India in 1962 was a major concern for the Soviets. If China succeeded in dominating India, it could establish itself as the rival capital of world communism. The 1962 Chinese attack heightened the urgency for the Soviets to gain influence, alliance, and control over India. The Soviets also knew that China was developing its own nuclear weapon. In 1964, China ultimately became the first Asian country to explode a nuclear bomb. The Soviets were rattled by a nuclear China, with whom they also had ongoing border disagreements. China had managed to slip out of the Soviet clutches. The biggest lesson that the Soviets took away was that they should have controlled Mao and nipped his anti-Soviet radicalization much earlier. In their minds, the 1962 Chinese attack on India demonstrated Mao's aspirations for regional dominance. The Soviet mistake with Mao and China could not be repeated with India. Nehru and India had to be brought under Soviet influence. India also had to be stood up as a counterbalance to not only the US but also to its regional allies in Asia, Pakistan and China. After Nehru's passing, 3 contenders had emerged for the top job: Morarji Desai, Gulzari Lal Nanda, and Lal Bahadur Shastri. The Soviets disliked Desai. He was a staunch Hindu opposed to the communist ideology. They supported Nanda instead. However, it was Shastri who ultimately became the Prime Minister, a development the Soviets were not pleased with. Tragically, Shastri died under mysterious circumstances in the Soviet Union shortly thereafter. What a coincidence. This was when the Soviet investment truly began to pay off. Indira Gandhi had become a Soviet asset nearly a decade earlier, while she was a Congress Party worker. Shastri was dead, and elections were coming up. The Soviets delivered Indira Gandhi the support of the Communist Party of India and the Communist Party of India Marxist, known as the CPI and CPIM. Indira reciprocated by aligning her Congress Party more closely with communist ideologies. By 1967, the Soviets had gained considerable influence over the Congress Party. They were funding many of its candidates and claimed to control over a third of India's parliament. The pivotal moment, however, came with the 1967 elections. Indira Gandhi and her Congress Party lost a significant number of seats. The Soviets attributed this unexpected outcome to the CIA. Indira Gandhi was now even more paranoid. You see, she had been following the CIA activities around the world: the attempted overthrow of Fidel Castro in Cuba, the military coup in Brazil, the attempted American overthrow of Sukarno in Indonesia, amongst others. Convinced of a CIA threat, she further aligned herself with the Soviets. As Prime Minister, Indira shifted her policies to the left. In a bold move in 1969, she even split the Congress Party. The anti-Soviet nationalists were pushed out to form a new party. This was the faction that 10 years later joined the Janata Party, which later became today's Bharatiya Janata Party, or the BJP. The Soviet plan was unfolding better than they had imagined. Indira Gandhi was now heavily influenced by the Soviets. During this period, India increasingly armed itself with Soviet weaponry, bolstering its defenses against the American-backed Pakistan. The Soviet aim was to weaken the American influence in the region. Indira Gandhi advanced this goal by supporting the creation of Bangladesh. Indira was not only the Prime Minister, but also the Minister of Home Affairs, Finance, Defense, and Information and Broadcasting. Such was Indira's growing reliance on the Soviets that she lifted all restrictions on the number of KGB agents in India. Soon, India became the largest KGB base outside the Soviet Union. They had infiltrated all levels of Indian government: the police, military, intelligence agencies, and key ministries such as Foreign Affairs and Defense. By 1972, Indira Gandhi had started to lean heavily on Soviet KGB intelligence. India was now a well-established playground of the Soviet and American intelligence agencies, and Indira was the ball they were kicking around. She sensed it. But she had every reason to trust the Soviets. They had her long before the CIA, back when she was merely the daughter of India's first Prime Minister. The KGB lavished the young Indira with gifts and vacations. They made her feel special as no one else did. This story of Soviet cultivation of Indira began with the independence of India. The world had just emerged from the throes of World War II. The United States, having developed and demonstrated the devastating power of nuclear weapons, sparked the Cold War and an intense nuclear arms race with the Soviet Union. If there was one thing the world leaders coveted more than immortality, it was the nuclear bomb. Even China soon joined the fray. Britain had recently lost control of India, its largest and most resource-rich colony. The resulting power vacuum presented a tempting opportunity for both the US and the Soviet Union to exert influence over India. While the US was over-focused on rebuilding Japan and Europe, the Soviets were relatively undistracted and quick to act. They took the lead in cultivating relationships with Indian political leaders to gain indirect control over the country. Nehru, India's first Prime Minister, chose continuity over change after independence. He retained the same civil servants who had served under the British rule. This decision posed a challenge for the Soviets. To complicate matters further, Nehru's sister, Vijayalakshmi Pandit, the then India's ambassador to the Soviet Union, was caught expressing negative views about communism to her British and American counterparts. Stalin, skeptical of Nehru, dismissed him as a mere Gandhian. The Soviets shifted their focus. They found a fertile ground for influence in the second-tier leadership beneath Nehru. They also strategically lavished attention on Indira, showered her with gifts, and hosted her on luxurious vacations. Indira, young and impressionable, was deeply captivated by the Soviet Union. A critical aspect of Soviet strategy was their support for the Communist Party of India, tactical and strategic. They provided financial aid when needed. The Soviets established a communist news publication in India. They also set up local businesses in India to keep the CPI well funded. The Soviet objective was clear: control India by infiltrating its political, governmental, and military institutions. Those were the 1950s of India. Fast forward to 1973. The Soviets had recently won Indira Gandhi a war against Pakistan. She was now also politically consolidated by the communists, and money was flowing into the party from the KGB. Indira Gandhi was completely in the grips of the KGB. It not only had infiltrated India's bureaucracy, intelligence, and the military, but also made India reliant on the Soviet armaments. By 1973, the Soviets had also managed to build a well-oiled propaganda machine in India. They controlled the 10 leading newspapers of India and used them to plant pro-Soviet and pro-communist stories. In the year 1975 alone, they were able to plant over 5,000 propaganda articles in various news outlets. Some of these articles exaggerated CIA's involvement in India. Others accused opposition parties, such as the Jan Sangh, of being CIA agents. Just when everything seemed to be working out for her, another problem was starting to brew, this time inside her own family. Indira's younger son, Sanjay Gandhi, had started to reveal his capitalist aspirations. He publicly criticized the communist approach. Indira, worried about American influence on her son, started to see his opposition as a threat. She likely considered the possibility of the CIA funding Sanjay Gandhi, just as the Soviets had funded her during her time working as a party official for Nehru. In 1975, Sanjay Gandhi finally indicated his intention to get out of the communist and Soviet clutches. That threatened the support her party had from CPI and CPI Marxists and the Soviets. This again made Indira suspicious about opposition brewing up in her party. As if that wasn't already enough, a High Court judgment invalidated her election victory from 4 years earlier in 1971. Indira Gandhi was charged with dishonest election practices, excessive election expenditure, and using government machinery and officials for party purposes. The High Court banned her from contesting elections for 6 years. Indira's paranoia was now at its peak. She saw the CIA's influence in this unfavorable judgment, just as the Soviets had been telling her. Within a couple of weeks of the judgment, she convinced the President of India to declare a state of emergency. She cited imminent internal and external threats to the Indian state as her reason. As this political drama was unfolding, Sanjay Gandhi took over the day-to-day functioning of the Congress party. He was now becoming a more prominent figure than Indira Gandhi herself. Sanjay became the extra-constitutional authority and effectively governed India during emergency from 1975 to 1977. In 2013, a WikiLeaks report noted that between 1957 and 1977, the CIA had gained a source within Indira Gandhi's household. Could it have been Sanjay Gandhi himself? We don't know. But what we do know is the extent of Indira's paranoia. She arrested all political opposition, especially the Hindu politicians, banned the RSS, and amended the Indian Constitution. The 42nd Amendment changed India's description from a sovereign democratic republic to a sovereign socialist secular democratic republic. It also stripped the Supreme Court of India of its powers and transferred many of the states' rights to the Prime Minister's office. The Soviet Union supported the emergency. It labeled any of its opponents as right-wingers. In 1977, the emergency ended. General elections were called. Indira Gandhi lost. The country's jubilant mood terrified her, offering no comfort. She blamed her loss on Hinduvadi Janata Party, which she believed was collaborating with the CIA. She regretted alienating the CPIM party members by arresting them during the emergency. Of course, this had eroded her relationship with the Soviets. Indira Gandhi was left with no choice but to split her party once more in 1978. Although she returned to power in 1980, she never regained full control of her party, which was now unequivocally led by her son Sanjay Gandhi. Remember how Sanjay seemed to be his own man? Someone who did not believe that communism and socialism held the answers to his ambitions for modernizing India? Coincidentally, just when Indira's standing with the Soviets was at its lowest, she lost her capitalist-minded son in an air crash in Delhi. Was it a coincidence? Well, I'll let you connect the dots on that one too. A few years later, Indira Gandhi was assassinated herself. By this point, the Soviets already had access to Indira's older son, Rajiv Gandhi. Rajiv was already being groomed to succeed Indira Gandhi after Sanjay's death. But by the end of 1980s, Rajiv Gandhi also died, and the Soviet Union collapsed and disintegrated soon after. The decade that followed was a hodgepodge of political alliances in India. Little governance was left in the country. To the rescue came the well-trained Indian bureaucracy, which was not only robust, but now also financially thriving. It was a thriving culture of large-scale, socially acceptable, institutional corruption that the Soviets had sprouted in India. So you say, India lost almost 5 decades being a pawn of foreign aspirations. In particular, the biggest Soviet legacy in India is its magnificently large-scale governmental corruption. What started as a Soviet machine to fund the Congress Party and its candidates ended up hollowing out the country. Bribes and kickbacks have become the compulsions of Indian society. Sadly, it is not over yet. India continues to be a fertile ground of operations for various external agencies. While All India Radio and Doordarshan escaped infiltration by the KGB, today's private Indian media is well in the grips of external ideological control. Bollywood still continues to be a powerful propaganda behemoth influenced by foreign finance and even terror. Some players have been replaced, others have newly emerged. While some are state, others are non-state. But in India, it continues to be a game of musical chairs. Thankfully, not being played inside the Prime Minister's office anymore. Hey, I hope you liked this episode. Please share it with family and friends far and wide, and let's keep the spirit alive. Until next time, namaste.